Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on how to maximize usage uptake and sustainability of your fundraising BI system. I'm Doug Cogswell, and I'm here with a couple of guests from Wake Forest, Chris and Anelda. Hi, Chris. Hi, Anelda.
Hello.
We're going to talk about their experiences. First, a bit of history, then we're going to go into and discuss in some detail 5 lessons learned, because they have done a bunch of things that have taken a concept which was driven back in 2008 by some new leadership who wanted a more data-driven approach to fundraising. And we came in and built 2 initial, as we call them, projects with their team. One to find prospects really for the research group, and that was late 2009. And then we focused on metrics for major giving staff officers and got those going. But then from then on, their team pretty much picked this up and ran with it. And Chris and Nelda, maybe you could take the story forward just in terms of the history of kind of 2 initial projects to where you are today.
Well, with the 2 initial projects, we started out with the client version of Advisor and worked on those projects and trying to tweak them and specify, make them more specific to Wake Forest. As we did that, we decided we thought we needed new projects and started planning for that future down the road. And we made little tweaks along the way, but did not try to redesign the initial project out of the way. But that new leadership and the transition of those first projects, being able to get those from the client version and getting them out to the web for everybody to see and access was a big selling point to get the data in front of everybody.
Yeah, and in the middle of that, you had projects in transition, but you also had a big system conversion from Banner to Blackbaud in the middle of all of this. That's kind of amazing you were able to sustain through. How did that go?
Well, as part of the conversion, we did our Advisor projects in check, and Advisor actually helped us as a checking tool. As we redirected projects and pointed them to different data sources, we could see when data did not show up and when the numbers did not look right to us. So understanding the testing that we do with Advisor and knowing that we wanted Advisor to point to the new Blackbaud environment the day we flipped the switch on Blackbaud.
So you had having Advisor in before the conversion, sounds like gave you some insight to what's actually in the content, which helped make the transition easier. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
And then after the transition, you mentioned you deployed some more projects. And if I'm correct, right now this has gone from like a handful of more power users up in these days to a large cross-section of your team?
Yeah, roughly. We've got about 160 people on staff right now, and we're approximating that 100 people are using it at least weekly. And it's a project where we've got projects out there that can go from management down to everyday development officer, fundraiser use, finding people to fill contact gaps in the middle of their day. So we've got a lot of uses.
So yeah, so you've gone from the power users, the researchers, and sort of the people more analytical. You just mentioned frontline fundraisers, and I know the other day you were talking about kind of on the road they're using this to get lists of names out. Is that right? Did I get that right?
That is correct. We have found that our frontline fundraisers have been using the iPad and even on the computer while they're on the road. And if we have a fundraiser in New York City and he has a gap in his day, he may pull up Advisor to see who can I call to see if I can fill some gaps to make my time more productive.
Yeah, so what's cool about this, we do a lot of talking about predictive analytics and modeling scores, which was part of some of the original kind of higher end projects. But clearly this kind of analytical dashboard visual display is useful across a wide section of the team, and people don't have the analytical skills. Pretty impressive what you guys have done. And sort of, we started this discussion about what happened. How did Wake Forest actually get from a few initial users to, I think you mentioned 100 out of 160 people on the team using this fairly regularly? We started this discussion at our user group last fall, and we kind of laid out some of these things. And I think the senior management buy-in question scrums, which the idea is after an initial training, somebody in the team throws a question out, and then others gather around it, maybe in a room, and try to answer it, and gets them comfortable with this idea of we can actually answer these questions versus throwing it back at advancement services. And the third one that came out was cutting off old unproductive routes to information, so that the teams, they may have habits that are working, but they chew up a lot of resources, and they may not give the right answer. So cut off those routes and get people actually through the questions crumbs doing this and realizing this isn't hard and they can actually do it. Then I know in discussions with, Imelda, you and you, Chris, you added a couple of at the bottom. So this has started last fall, but then as we've been talking about this, it's kind of built out, and I think we kind of boil it down to, if we look across our clients at least, if you do these kinds of things, you're much more likely to get the experience Wake Forest has had versus, the other side of it is, 6 months later, there's two experts. One of the experts leaves, so there's one expert who can use something like this, and then it's a complete bottleneck. That's probably not the desire of us or anybody putting something like this in. So let me flip it back to you, Chris, and you, Imelda, and just sort of talk through some of these and maybe a little bit more detail on how you guys have actually done this.
Well, with the senior management buy-in, one of the things we're getting is the senior staff realized with either the banner system we were on or the black vault system we're on now, you can really only see one constituent at a time. So looking at the data visualization that Advisor provides helps us look out and see, okay, how is this group engaged with the university? How do we need to engage with them? And that helped from events to giving to the reunion classes and several of those things, because you were able to look and find how are people, find commonalities, how people did engage and like to engage.
I remember back at the beginning with those first projects, your senior team would show up actually in the training and sort of come in and not go through the whole training, but participate with the team and kind of share their expectations on how this was going to help move forward. So we've not had that everywhere. Your team, your senior team clearly was engaged and wanted to send those signals.
Yeah, I think another thing they were very helpful with, they had a good idea on how they wanted to use Advisor in the business. And so when I came in to address the training and adoption, there was already considerable thought on we can use Advisor to get this type of data, whether it be live bunts, side bunts, reunion planning, how many alums we have by college, event planning. And so I was able to tap into their knowledge and then share that across the department.
Yeah, it's great. So that kind of support helped enable, Imelda, you lead the training efforts, help you just, instill that as a value that is important here.
Yeah, they had an idea and they had a vision on how they wanted it to be used, and they were very good at communicating it to me and through Chris, and then being able for us to roll that out across advancement and even in Renolda House and athletics, because it's not just advancement that uses Advisor. We have various departments across the university.
And then sort of the second one, these idea of question scrums, or somebody gets trained. We can talk how you do that. It's like the bottom of the list here. But at this point, somebody gets trained and then they go to use it, they get stuck. And there's ways you get engaged. And so just talk through a little bit about how your team gets engaged, either by proactively driving one of these question scrums or being available when somebody gets stuck and needs help.
Well, I think the number one way is that the team, even when we first deployed, they were used to going to our reporting team, Chris and Tammy, and even after they were trained, like you said earlier, they wanted to just follow that way they'd always been doing things. So they would go to the reporting team and they would have questions like, give me a list of prospects that are in a certain geographical area that are unassigned. Well, immediately, due to our management again, they were told, let's use Advisor for that. And they would send that over to me, and then I would work with the staff person to help them, again, reinforce Advisor's the source. And I think without that management decision that, yes, if these requests come in, they need to be redirected to training, or at times the reporting team would help with it, I think it would have failed. I think that was just really great insight from our leadership team. And then not only to say we do it, but to actually follow through and do it.
And I think having the support of senior leadership as we went through a conversion, and anybody who's been through a conversion knows that you lose reports and you can't go into a new system and have all the reports that you had before. It takes a while to build the reporting suite back up. And that's one thing we've looked at is we've helped prioritize the reports that we're building is this information available? Can we teach somebody how to do it in Advisor instead of having to take the development and testing time on a production level report?
So on the third, go ahead.
Yeah, and by working with the reporting team, whether I was going back to work with an individual and help them understand how to get that data out of Advisor, I was also able to build a communication plan by understanding at what points in the year certain information was required by the staff. So in the May-June time frame, they're looking for live bunts and side bunts, who gave last year but not this year. In August, they're looking more around reunion planning, filling new members and volunteers on our boards and councils. And so what we did was once a month, at a minimum, we had a Did You Know that would go out. And that would be focused on what certain groups were doing at that time with their work. And it would be a step-by-step with screenshots. And then I would store it on a wiki site so that they could go back as it was archived and pull the information as they needed. And not only by tying it to what they're doing in the business today or at that time, but also keeping them aware and keeping Advisor out in front of them. Don't forget, this is here. You can get this information right on the spot. You don't have to put a request in and wait a day or two to get it. You can pull it yourself. I think a lot of that enthusiasm and interest, it just really helped build it and help keep that momentum going.
It sounds like you were proactively thinking about how to categorize, good process in keeping this in front of people so that they saw this as easy to do. And then the third point, making sure they also realize that we actually were kind of blessed with a transition because it forced a cutoff of a lot of the old ways and it drove people more towards this new, more efficient way. But it sounds like there's a combination of things and being fairly strategic about it, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of this question, Scrum, is that since there was these Did You Knows and there was all this information coming out to remind them it's here and this is what you can do with it, maybe we didn't think of something specific, but then the managers or our users would come to us and say, well, can we do this or can we do that? And so we would meet with those individuals or those teams, get a better understanding of what they were trying to accomplish, and then pull their team in together and very focused provide instruction with a specific outcome in mind. And that really did build some excitement and I think, again, helped with adoption.
And so after you would do that, and now there was a team, how self-sufficient was the team? Did you have to do that once or twice or 25 times, or what typically happened?
Advisor is very different for many of our staff here. It really is a very different look and feel than what they're accustomed to. So it did take multiple meetings and sessions and follow-up. It wasn't like I'd walk in and 30 minutes it was over. I mean, there was a big investment of time for everybody. But I think the ability to have that information at their fingertips, it just really made it all worthwhile.
And Doug, your point in us empowering our staff, we've noticed as we have kind of pushed them to use Advisor and the other tools that we're providing for them, that the type of request that we're fulfilling on a daily report request kind of schedule has totally changed. There is a request that we would get that people just wanted data dumped to them into a spreadsheet. And now they're being more strategic about what they ask for, and it's usually more summary or mail or broadcast email kind of related information.
Yeah, I was going to say on the third point, because Chris, you're on the report side, we sometimes see almost fear or concern from the people currently producing reports that if we make this generation self-service, my job's going to go away or I'm not going to have anything to do. It doesn't sound like that's been the case.
No. And one thing that we really did emphasize is that Advisor was for planning purposes. If they were ever going to be reporting financial information. If they were ever going to do mailing lists or large mass mailings, they were not to use Advisor. So they had very clear instruction. If they were going to do mass mailings or want to report financial information, they still went back to our reporting team. It was more just for planning.
So for the large mailings, I mean, do they, for example, find the list in Advisor, then give you the ID so you can execute out with all the mail rules, or are they getting criteria that they then give to you? How does that handoff work?
They're using, our staff is using Advisor more as a planning tool for mailings, where they will use it to make sure they order the correct number of envelopes, fulfillment pieces, that is all going to go together. And then they'll talk to us about what they selected, and we'll go through and do an official mail file and exclude all the mail preferences. So we don't have our staff doing a export list from Advisor right now.
Yeah, we don't have information if they say do not email, do not phone. We don't have that information in Advisor. So that's a really important piece that we convey through training, and we continue to message that out. It's very specific use for Advisor.
The other reason we don't have them do that is we are also marking records when people are being mailed pieces and being emailed, so that we can keep track with how many contacts we have with the person and what kind of contact we're having. So we don't want Joe from the annual fund just to pull a list and send out a blast email without telling people.
Yeah, just to the general audience, I mean, we have probably 3 ways people are using Advisor for lists. One is like Wake Forest is doing it. Another would be, export IDs and just send the IDs back to the core system, and then the team picks up and works off the defined list, but they're applying all the mail rules. We've got others who have the mail and the exclusion rules in the Advisor project, so they're exporting lists straight from Advisor to the mail sender or the phone group or wherever it's going. So there's a spectrum here. Just want to say that. And Chris, on the reporting side, I would imagine if the load of all these sort of kind of standard, one after the other day-to-day requests drops, then your team ought to be able to be a lot more strategic in what they do. Did that happen?
That has happened, and when I first came on board, we had 2 to 3 people at a time running just manual data pulls, and now we have pivoted our team to, we've got one person who is creating we're using blackballed internet services, so we're doing BBIS email list, and that person can pull mail files, BBIS list, and now we've got 3 people creating SSRS reports for our to be placed into blackball, so the users can run the reports themselves.
Yeah, we've seen that happen quite a bit, where the commodity workload gets distributed out self-service, and then the reporting team can get engaged in much more strategic, longer-range initiatives, and it's actually good for both sides.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Doug, you were talking about people being concerned about things being streamlined, jobs being eliminated. With us upping staff for a campaign, that has always been a question, but as we go along through our campaign and the more reports we create and the more items we create and more Advisor projects we create, we find that we're still hiring staff. So jobs are not being eliminated. It's just we're being more strategic about what we're doing.
Great. Could you guys both talk a bit about, question scrums to get people going, cutting off old routes to information? I can see that works with a lot of people. How did this actually work with the field officers? Because I know our client base, some teams have picked up really well with field officers. Others have had resistance, and it's been harder going to get the actual frontline field officers to use an interactive tool like this. How did that go on your side?
Well, we've got a couple different responses. One is we've got several field officers who love data. They can get into it, and I've got our director of development for the business school. He told me, whatever I have to do to get to Advisor, I'm going to do it because it is that valuable of a tool to me. I've got another development officer who is in the Northeast, and he is not a computer person at all, but his admin is in Advisor every day, pulling information out and feeding it to him. So you've got a variety of how people do want to get into it and don't want to get into it. But they all know that advisors are going to give them what they ultimately need.
And Anelda, on your side, how have you worked to how have you pushed this out, given access or visibility or training to the field officers? How did that go?
So have we moved on to the fifth bullet?
We're kind of like, jumping around, but yeah, it's the fifth bullet is people come on board and in the training, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. As far as, so when someone comes on board, we have an onboarding program here in Advancement, and I have worked with our HR group, and all of our systems training is incorporated into that. So it's not just, what do they need to know to work at Wake Forest or in Advancement, but also what are the systems, the tools in Advancement that they use. And about the third week, advisor is added in to their onboarding program. It's a 90-minute training session. And in Advancement, we've spent a lot of time with what's called Smart Navigator, and they're very interested in people's thinking talents, their learning styles, all in how to communicate amongst each other as a team. So I make sure that the training has a hands-on component. There's demonstration, there's the visual, the auditory component. But so the classes can have either maybe 2 or 3 people. We've had as many as 10 people in the session, and it's very structured. I have guides. I have a quick reference that they can take with them. I've spent, like I mentioned earlier, quite a bit of time looking at step-by-step exercises where they can just follow the instruction, because I found that after they get the demonstration and they understand it and they see how it works, that they really just want to roll their sleeves up and start digging into it and experimenting. And so for many of the new people that come on board, they don't have examples of what would they want to search for. They just don't really know. So that's why I give them examples, very specific, and then they're able to get the idea, and they're also able, when they leave, to take these examples with them and be able to use it back at their desk. We've done some audio recordings, some video recordings, so those are available on demand, and then we offer all these refresher sessions or just working one-on-one with groups. One thing that I have found, in addition to what I've just described, is that as people are following the examples, or maybe they're coming up with their own real-life examples on their end, because all of these are real-life, that I encourage them to write down, what it is they want to query for, and as they go through the step, to watch the entity count and write down the number of records they're finding. And then I have them go back and do it again just to verify and double-check. Because I know that first year that we deployed Advisor, my concern was, are we getting the right answers? So many times I would work with people and we'd get answers, and I'd go back over to my reporting team and say, can you double-check this? Are we getting the same numbers? And then over time, people started getting that confidence, and they weren't questioning it. They had confidence in the tool. So one of the last exercises after they've done their practice is just to locate their own name, query until they get their name, the only name on the entity list. And at that point, it really starts to click, and I see a lot of excitement about it. And there might be 1 or 2 in the room that sort of just are overwhelmed with it, and you realize you're going to have to work with them some more. But that's sort of the overview. Is that what you were looking for?
Well, and I know it is, and I know it's working because I was sitting at a conference, I think it was the North Carolina APRA conference a month or 2 ago, and I was sitting next to one of the new Wake Forest prospect researchers, and she heard I was from Advisor, and she started talking to me about this onboarding training, and she started talking to me about what she was doing, and she was basically teaching me. I'm going, I don't know what they do, but it certainly worked well with her. And so congratulations, because I think, you've done a lot to introduce people to this, but then give them simple ways they can keep getting at what they've learned, in the future, like a week later, a month later, 6 months later, either by on-demand, I heard videos, content with screenshots published, or access to people who can sit down with them.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's been helpful is since we have onboarding, we have it every month, every other month with new hires. I do open it up and let people that have been here all along, if in case they want to come into a refresher, they can drop in. That's helped out a lot. I think it's just ongoing. It's not just push it out once and let it go. It's just constant care and feeding.
It is definitely constant care and training. Even this morning I had somebody asked me about something, and I was like, well, have you considered using Advisor? This is here. Here's a new enhancement we put in within the last month. I think it'll help with that, what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think from a trainer's perspective, the relationship you have with your reporting team and the reporting team willingness to come, when I come to them with questions or to Chris with questions because I don't quite get it, he's more than willing to take time. Sometimes he'll just tell me on the fly, this is how you do it. Other times he scratches his head and he's got to give it some thought.
It's definitely a collaborative effort because there's times we have to go through it and we have to go through it step by step of what the question we're trying to solve is at times. And Anela takes great notes and puts down the steps and helps distribute that back out to the staff as they need it.
Yeah, and just listening to both of you talk and for the group, what's cool here is the original team involved in Advisor. One of the key people is no longer at Wake Forest, and Anelda and Chris have come in after the initial efforts were underway and joined the team. So a great example of the institutional culture has picked this up, and it's not a specific person or persons dependent. It's part of the way of doing things, and then it becomes sustainable, and success stories get shared, and it gets out to a group of people, which is what's really cool here.
And I think one more point is that so when our users are working with Advisor, they always see areas for improvement. I mean, as soon as you release something, they're ready to find something else that you need to add or adjust. And Chris and the reporting team have really been responsive with that. Initially, the labels were very cryptic. They came from Banner, and it was really hard trying to explain what a certain label or chart of data meant. And giving that feedback to the team, Chris just jumped right on it. I know the individual you met at this conference you were speaking with, when we export our lists, we had several entity list tabs, and then they were having from Excel to combine these lists. And it was a lot of extra steps, and they were frustrated with it. And so again, that was brought back to Chris, and he created an export tab. So it pulls 2 or 3 entity lists, the data from those 2 or 3 lists into one, and again, it just streamlined. So their willingness to listen to user feedback and then go in, and it doesn't always happen right away, but making that change, keeping it on their radar and making that change, I think has also helped our users embrace and adopt this.
And for the people that are out there that are making changes, we try to collect several enhancements at one time so that we're not opening up Advisor and making enhancements every week or month, but that way we can open it up and then add 5 or 6 enhancements at one time. And then it's a significant change when it's published back out and the staff goes back into it and they say, hey, now I can do, it's not just one little tweak or there's a lot more to it. Now we have had a couple occasions where there's been something minor that needed to be changed, and we can do that relatively easy on the fly.
So I'll keep an eye on the clock here. We're going to run into the Q&A a little bit, but that's good. It was quite, the point 4 we sort of glossed over, keeping it simple. I know I'm going to say a couple things here, then turn it back to you guys. This concept of more simpler projects are better than fewer complex projects. We have several other of our more deployed clients, Emory and Georgia Tech, for example, would say exactly the same thing and have both spoken on this. We actually did a webinar, which I think I gave the group a link on, creeping complexity and how to avoid it, because left to the road, most projects have a way of growing in complexity because somebody wants something added and somebody else wants something added, and then pretty soon you've got the kitchen sink of all projects versus most human beings are not equipped to deal with, we would call that richness, but it conflicts with simplicity. So we would be big on, and I know you guys have been big on, keeping things simpler and creating more projects rather than adding more to an already large existing project.
From a usability perspective, the not having that big kitchen sink, but having projects like Opportunity Pipeline that are very specific to opportunities or commitments, the commitment accounting tool, it's made it easier for the user to understand how to get in and what they're trying to get out of it. And I think Chris has done a great job using filters. We have in both of those projects a whole page, and they are literally able to go in and just check the box without having to do all this selecting and excluding, and it's just really made it a lot easier, as well as the export tab that I told you about. Those are just things that have made it easier to work with.
Right, and one of the projects that Anelda mentioned is We were in the middle of a campaign, so we did a project that we called our campaign accounting tool, which matches our reports out of Blackball system. And we started the first tab with a filters tab, and it has school, campaign region, and a variety of other filters. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. But by having that up front, it applied and it filtered everything in the rest of the project. So we didn't have any outlier data laying out there, and it's like you set the filters in this area, and it filters tabs 2, 3, and 4, but not tab 5. So keeping it simple that way, that everything is filtered or nothing is filtered, helped users as well.
Good. And then sensitivity to time, I'm going to swing into the Q&A period. We do have a few questions, but just want to summarize on these success factors that we kind of talked about these ahead of time and grouped up in kind of 5 key things that really do seem to make the difference between an investment in something like this, going out widespread in becoming sustainable and ingrained in a culture versus 6 months in, there's 2 people who know something about it, one leaves, so you're down to 1 person, 1 expert who's the bottleneck, and obviously the former is much better than the latter. It has been recorded, and we have actually slides with summary points on it, which we'll make available in the next week or so. So questions. We've got several that have come in. Chris and Anelda, has your VP and very senior management been using Advisor, and if so, what do they use it for?
They do use it. I don't get the reports weekly of what they are using it for. I know our Associate VP of Alumni Donor Services will use it on the fly in meetings to help identify how much has been given this month, this year, constituents in a campaign region or club region, or who has attended an event recently.
I think that's one of the areas we have to continue to strive for improvement. People seem to want to get in and create a list and put it in Excel and take it with them. And just that whole change of being able to select and query and then view the data and discuss it right on the screen, we're still working. I mean, in some areas we have it, but there's still a lot of room, I think, for improvement in that area.
Good. Yeah, and by the way, for the audience, you can put questions in by typing them in the bottom, or you can also raise your hand on the right side, and if you raise your hand, we can actually unmute you, and you can ask your question live. So 2 ways. Some questions have come in. Another question is, are there any things that did not go well that you would comment on and choose not to do again in your rollout in subsequent deployments?
One of the things that Anelda mentioned earlier that has been a big help is when we brought up Blackball, we redesigned the projects and we made the label match what was in the front end that users were going to see. So they didn't have to decipher a code in a header or label, and I think that was helpful to get people to buy in. They knew what they were looking at, and it also helped when they exported data list.
I think just having so many tabs with so many charts on the tab, that was so difficult. They were just overwhelmed, and over time, Chris was able to, working with Tim, to fine-tune this and actually come up with these dedicated projects. That was, I think, one of the biggest improvements we made.
I think one of the things that helped with adoption is we've got senior manager, our director of development, has asked for all of the schools to provide him the same number, and he told us to come up with the method because they can get the numbers from Advisor. So Anelda rolled out the training to all of the school departments of how to report their campaign giving and what has come in so far each month to that. So that's kind of where we talk about us pushing out training. That's also a pull that's come as well.
Yeah, and this whole concept of, Nelda, you just mentioned the project with all the pages. What often happens is the first project that we get retained for is for prospect research. It's a fairly rich, prospect identification project, which is going to have all kinds of pages, employment degrees, staffing and giving. We probably put some scoring algorithms in it. And then that probably grows over time, this concept of creeping complexity. And we've had some cases where teams then say, well, let's push this out to the field officers because there's a couple of data-centric field officers see it and want it. The problem is, and we kind of have seen this, if you take a pool of 100 field officers, there's probably 10, 15-ish, maybe 20 who could deal with something like that. There's another, 30, 40% of the pool who can deal with something that's a lot simpler. And then there's another 30, 40% who probably aren't going to touch it, but they might go to an AA or some research person to be walked through it. And if you push the complex thing out, which is good for maybe 10 or 15%, the others are going to balk at it and say it's too complicated, which it is for them. So we've had clients that have pushed a really simple version out and got an uptake, and then they secondly put a more complex or richer one out for the ones that can handle it. We have others who put the richer one out, sometimes against our probably advice, and then they run into this problem where they then have to create a second simpler one, which isn't hard to do, but they would have had a lot more goodwill if they had realized that at the beginning versus, kind of scare everybody with complexity. So kind of just building on your point there, we see that kind of a bunch across the board.
And Doug, we try to get a test audience to look at their advisor project before we push it out when we've got a whole new project. And if we can find a development officer who may have a savvy admin or a development officer who doesn't have a tech-savvy admin, and kind of get their feedback and the back and forth of what's good about it, what's going to be a struggle, can we train through it, what documentation do we need to provide. All of those things really help with buy-in down the road.
And if you are going to push a large one out like we did, ours probably had how many tabs?
It seems like it's about 20 or 25, somewhere in the ballpark.
Then you need to think through how each of the groups are going to use it and then target what they will get out of it and train to that so that they can walk away with some value. Because if you just give them the whole thing and let them go try to figure it out, it's not going to work.
And I believe in Nelda's initial training, she sticks with the bio and geo tabs in our kitchen sink project. It doesn't, we don't try to help people consume everything at one time. Start with the simplest data and kind of carve our way in.
Yeah, so we're getting some more questions in here. There's a question about filters. Let me summarize this. Do you recommend putting the filters all together on one page, or do you tile them through a project based on the content of the other pages? And if you put the filters all on one page, do you put any charts on the same page with the filters? I guess that's the gist of the question. I just merged several together here.
Well, I got the gist of it, and we're good. The first project we had, I think we had charts on pages with filters, and we tried filtering on the same page. But we found out that people would try to do multiple things while they're in there without resetting the project. And you forget about what filters you have set in what areas. So in our experience, we think it's better to have all the filters on one page, and we like the filters up front. That way it is the first thing somebody sees when they log into the project, and they're not distracted by a data list or a chart that they are starting to consume first. It is, here's my filters, what do I need to think through? And then I can go look through some other things, and I may do some other filtering later on, but the main filters being up front, I think, is important to us.
Yeah, we would agree that we may put some charts, but we agree that get the filters all together in one place up front is important, because otherwise people lose track of what's on and what's off and don't know where to find them. I will add that one of our clients made a recommendation, and it's been implemented, that our filters, if you have the same filter on multiple pages, if you change the one on the first page, the others will obviously reflect the change. But it's still sometimes hard to find filters on page 5 or 10 or in the 20-page project page 20. Oh, there's a question. What filters do you have? So if we come into the first page, what would we find?
Well, it depends on what project you're looking at. If you're looking at the general project, which has all the tabs, our very first filters have living, is it a individual or corporation, and also our prospect map quadrants. Are they principal gift, major gift, general, that type of thing? Are they living or deceased? So there's a very few, just a very few in the general project on that first tab. And there's a list on that same tab, but that was our first project. More recent ones, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah. One of our more recent projects that I talked about was our campaign accounting project. And on that, it is a accounting of what the giving commitments and collected throughout the campaign. So we've got filters about what school, what campaign committee. We've got a subtype of committee group. We've got our audience segment of the donor. If they are a principal gift donor, what the prospect status is. Are they managed, unmanaged, not a prospect? What campaign region do they live in? So we can get a view across the country or across the world. The prospect map, where do they fall? Are they a annual suspect or are they a high-end loyal suspect? Then we've got the primary constituency of the family giving unit. We look at people as a family. And so are they an alum, a parent, an estate, a religious organization? Is this person, is there a board of trustee member in this FGU? So can we select on our trustee members quickly and easily? And then we have all constituencies where we can look and see all the alums, all the parents, regardless of what your primary constituency may be, because we look at primary versus all constituencies a little bit differently.
So there's charts.
Go ahead.
There's 12. They're on this tab. We have 12 charts, and each of those has filters within it. And then we have a count at the bottom. So as they filter, they can see how many records are selected or excluded, how many FGUs, that type of thing.
And just for the group, you know, these filters are the little checkbox. We call them text filters. And applying them drops every chart and every list in the dashboard down to that subset of data. And so all the visual discovery happens at a subset of the data. So if you're trying to, as Chris and Nelda have been saying, you know, look at a subset, that's a much easier way to get to a subset than when you're working with the chart. You're always just coming back to that subset. We also, on the web version, the filters can be applied. So we've got some clients who've set up a general project, but it'll filter on domain login credentials. So, you know, I might come in and get, I don't know, alums in the Northeast, and Anelda might come in and get all constituents in North America, and Chris might get parents in the West region based on our credentials. So it's basically those filters can also be attached to the main credentials and applied and log into the web server version.
Right.
And the beauty to the filter tab is that whether we have people that are working on their monthly dashboards for commitments and pipeline, whether they're from schools or they're from regions, they can use the same tab. They just go to a different chart, and what they select or unselect, then everything from there flows the same. And so I'm able to take a group of people and train to the same dashboard. Maybe the report's slightly different, but the process of getting the data out of the tool is the same. They just go to a different chart and pick region or school. So it works. It's pretty slick.
So we have a question here about, you know, we talked about prospect identification. This is about gifts identification, because the question kind of goes, do you have a project that's tracking major gifts that come in over periods of time?
We're not specifically measuring major gifts. We are tracking in our campaign accounting. We do have the giving that's come in and the amount, and we do have a summary so that we can see within a filter what the FGU has given towards the campaign altogether. We also have a commitment pyramid that may track major gifts indirectly. But it's kind of looking at how much each kind of gift to a designation or project has been by the family giving unit.
And you just mentioned, Chris, family giving unit. Actually, I'm going to ask a question next, because we have clients that manage pipelines and giving at the entity level.
Right.
Probably half of them, and there's a half of them that manage at the household or the family or some composite level where it could be a couple of entities and a trust all bundled together into
right.
unit, that's what then is signed as a prospect and giving is measured on. How do you use the family versus the entity?
We use the entity more of when we're looking at reunion class. If you're the class of 81 and the spouse is the class of 80, we'd probably invite you to both. Not probably, we would. But when we look at solicitation and giving, that's when we really look at the family giving unit. That is what me and my spouse, the gifts we direct. When we're being solicited, the solicitation is going to our family. We're probably only going to give one gift. So the plans, the solicitations, the gifts, the plan gifts are all done on the family giving level.
And I assume then you're summing hard credit for the family unit. You don't have to worry about soft credit because all of it's in that one unit?
That's correct.
Yeah, so we've got, it's actually really nice for us when that happens because we create a family or a household table which links to the entity table. So giving is just summed at the family units or the household units, but when you click a household, you're getting the entities in it. So if it's activities or degrees or the things that are entity level, we've got this one-to-many relationship. They all light up. So it's actually a really good use of us if you have that family, household, whatever you call it, unit concept.
Right, and I think as we have grown our projects, we initially had entity lists, and I think we had an FGU list as well, family giving unit list. But we've built those out more to be able to cross-reference the two so that I can see that the Chris Jackson Foundation has got Chris Jackson, my wife, and our giving foundation that's all related. So we can see that one-to-many relationship.
Right. A couple more questions. I'm actually going to throw one out. I know we have somebody from Georgia Tech who's on the group here who has a lot of perspective, especially on the small, simple projects. So if you're hearing this, if you would put your hand up, I can then unmute you and bring you in if you are so inclined. Otherwise, we'll keep on and bring you into another session. So, Chris, and so that's a message to somebody in the audience. Another question. Have there been any people who have seen Advisor and just said it's not for them, and what was the cause of that?
Sure, there have been. And generally, it's with General Dad. That's our massive kitchen sink project, and they just say it's just too much data. It's just too much information. I get lost in it. And as many times as you go back and try to work with them, they just do not want to deal with it, and they may have their staff actually pull the query, get the information themselves for them. They don't touch it. They let someone on their team do it. But we do have those.
Yeah, we've seen that, and probably I would editorialize as one of the more disabling forces when somebody sees something that is overwhelming or too complex for their personal, consumption ability, and getting that balance right is really important. And the other thing is, if you put something too simple in front of like an analytic prospect researcher, they're going to balk and say there's just not enough in this. So getting that balance and having a breadth of more tuned projects that fit those needs is really important.
And Doug, I think you hit the nail on the head there, is understanding the purpose of the project. Our prospect research team, they always want something more in a project, and that is great, and we're trying to put more in the projects. But however, understanding who the project was built for and why the project was built helps us bring back that scope and say, I would love to do this, but it could hinder these other three departments that are also using this project, and we need to hold this off for right now, and maybe we can get it in later, maybe we can do a different project. So we alter that a couple different ways.
Yeah, I'd say just, advisor's perspective, we've had a couple of situations where we actually thought we were building a prospect identification project for the prospects research team, and we show up for training, and there's a room of like 15 people, which includes a whole bunch of field officers, which, then a bunch of warning lights go off because we're walking into that zone of something got mixed up in who this was for and what the purpose was. So the audience isn't who we intended the project for, and it's hard then to back off. So I think we've also learned that lesson, that we need to be really clear on the problem we're solving, the scope, who it's being applied to, who's going to be the users as we build it out, and certainly before we come in for training, because, and those of you looking at something like this, having more people in the training room may not be a good thing, because if they're out of the scope of what this thing was designed for, they're either going to say, they could say, if they're an analyst, this is too simple, it doesn't solve my problem, or they could say, this is too rich, too complicated, it overwhelms me, and both cases are not ideal. And it's, in most cases, in both of those cases, it's not that hard to, modify and create another one that does fit their needs. But I think that's a key lesson, and you just stated it really well, Chris. And
Anelda has been great about us being able to follow the process of train the trainer, where we'll sit down together and I will talk Anelda through what I think we can do, and she'll learn anything, and she understands the training, and she's been able to digest it, document it, and then start training the staff as a whole. So we're not trying to train everybody at one time.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the training, but we're there, or I'm there, I'm available to them for support. So they get in, they start doing it, they get lost, it doesn't make sense. I encourage them, contact me, let me see if I can help you, and if I don't get it, I have the team that I go back to in reporting that helps me, and then I go back to them. So if you're not, you have to do all of it. You have to provide the training, you have to provide the follow-up, keep trying to figure out what their interests are and connect it to Advisor so they see that value and that benefit, and then just be there for them as they use it.
I'd say just thinking through it, this isn't a statistically relevant number necessarily, but I bet only probably a quarter to a third of our clients have integrated take Advisor or a BI deployment like this into their training group and formalized it like you guys have. The others tend to be more ad hoc, and sometimes that works. We've got some success stories where that's integrated into the culture and the organization really well, and sometimes it doesn't. You're back to two knowledgeable people situation. But I would encourage all of our clients to kind of go back to those 5 points. And the bottom one, which is onboarding, baking it into training, making it part of the culture driven by senior management, those things kind of really revolve together and create a situation where it becomes part of the kind of the psychic being of the culture, and it's it's there for the long term, and it's actually really helping people day to day. I'm looking at we're reaching our time here. I'm seeing that we had a bunch of questions. That's great. We've got time if somebody wants to put another one in. Otherwise, we've been at it for a while now. Covered a lot of good ground. We have recorded this, and we will be pushing this out within the week, and we'll have the handout. There's the detail of the discussion is summarized in the handout, which will go along with the posting of this in about a week. So I'm going to thank you, Chris, and you, Anelda, for your time today.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate what you guys have done and your willingness to share so openly. So thanks. All of you have a great afternoon, and you'll get a notice on this within the week. Thank you very much. Bye.